Hello and welcome. Today is Monday, July the 28th, 2014. This is Paul Sandhu coming to you with another episode of Wake Up and Live Radio. I have a new guest on the line today. This is a real-life Indiana Jones. His name is Ken Gerhard. He is a widely recognized cryptozoologist and field researcher for the Center for Protean Zoology, as well as a fellow of the Pangea Institute and consultant for various research organizations. Ken has searched for evidence of mysterious animals and legendary beasts around the world, including Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, enigmatic winged creatures, and even werewolves. In addition to appearing in 3 episodes of the television series Monster Quest on History Channel, Ken is featured on the History Channel special The Real Wolfman, as well as Paranatural on National Geographic Channel, Legend Hunters on Travel Channel, Weird of What with William Shatner on Sci-Fi, Ultimate Encounters on True TV, Unexplained Files. Well, the list of his accomplishments and his biography is very long. I will mention that Ken is also an author, and he has written at least 3 books that I'm aware of. Big Bird, Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters, and his new one, which is Encounters with Flying Humanoids, which, by the way, I'm in the process of reading and enjoying thoroughly. And then he co-authored a book with Nick Redfern titled Monsters of Texas. So I will stop here and let Ken tell us more about himself. Hello and welcome, Ken.
Hello, Paul. Thanks so much for having me on. It's definitely an honor to be here.
Yes, your list of accomplishments is rather lengthy, so we could spend a whole hour on that alone. So just give us a little bit about, since you're a new guest on this program, tell us a little bit about yourself and how it is that you ended up doing what you are doing. And I think this is a field that I am very envious of, that that is something that I would have loved to have done. And how did you end up in it?
Well, it is a very fascinating field, and essentially, as you mentioned, I'm a cryptozoologist, which means I go out and search for evidence of unverified species. That's a technical way to say it. I do look for a number of the more iconic and legendary creatures that people are familiar with, things like Bigfoot and the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, the Mothman, and so forth and so on. And I feel very blessed to be in the position that I'm in, but it's nothing that I really planned for in terms of a career choice. I just had kind of it's been a lifelong interest and passion of mine, and first learned about Bigfoot when I was a young boy, and read all the books I could find on the subject. And as I got older, I had an opportunity to travel all over the world with my family, which was very exciting, and learned about a number of legendary creatures that way, of course. And when I was 15 years old, my family vacationed at Loch Ness, of course, home of the legendary Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. So that was a pretty pivotal event in my life as well. So it's just something that I've always been interested in. And over the past decades, I have written 3 books and then become a field investigator, which means I go out and look for physical evidence. And I've been very blessed to have appeared on a number of television shows, which has opened a lot of doors for me as well. So right now I just continue to write and research and travel, and I'm having a blast doing it.
Is this field, Ken, of cryptozoology and related research, is this still something on the fringes of the academic world and limited to some TV channels or magazines that are, one could say, somewhat sensationalistic, or is it something that has become more mainstream in the last few years?
Well, it's a great question. Cryptozoology was initially started by, some very eminent zoologists back in the 1950s, people like Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans and Ivan T. Sanderson and so forth. And so from very scientific roots, it's always been kind of considered a fringe science or a frontier science, very controversial. Most traditional scientists do not want to acknowledge that there is evidence for some of these more remarkable things out there. Of course, it's become very popularized, and as you suggest, in recent years, there have been a number of television programs, and for better or for worse, I suppose, because some of them are very good and scientific, but on the other hand, you have some that are a bit sensational and perhaps
they bend the truth a little bit.
They cast a dubious eye, so forth, on the field. But I think the climate is gradually and slowly changing. I mean, we do have a few very incredible scientists that are involved. Dr. Jeff Meldrum at Idaho State University, of course, very well known in the Bigfoot field. John Bindernagel, a wildlife biologist from British Columbia. And so on and so forth. There's some researchers and scientists in England that I work with that have, impressive scientific backgrounds. So, I think the attitudes are changing a little bit, but, it's a slow and arduous process, and it is, very much a fringe science in terms of some of the things that we're looking for are mathematically, they seem rather improbable.
Yes, but, we live in a world in which, despite people's misconceptions that every square inch of this planet has already been explored and all the depths of the seas have been discovered, that is not the case, is it? There's much, even on the North American continent, that, for example, in British Columbia, where I have lived, that probably no modern man has set foot upon even today.
Yeah. That's a good point. What I always sort of try to remind people is that, first off, we tend to like to think that we live in a very explored world and that we've sort of all got it figured out at this point, but that's not the case at all. Science is an ongoing process of discovery, rediscovery. There are many remote corners of our planet that remain literally untouched by modern man, vast wilderness areas. In addition to that, new animal species are still being discovered on a fairly regular basis. Many of them are very small, of course, but just last year, for example, a new species of tapir was discovered down in South America. Tapir, of course, is a perissodactyl, an odd-toed ungulate, very large animal, weighs about 250 pounds. One of the largest animals indigenous to South America, and it was virtually unknown to science until last year. So many more examples I could list, but I think that gives us hope that maybe there are some other large and remarkable things out there that we haven't discovered yet.
Yeah, it reminds me of that fish that was caught off the coast of Africa. I forget the name, but apparently it has been, people had always said that it was extinct for like 35 million years or something, and then they caught a live one.
Yes, great. That's a great story and very iconic in terms of cryptozoology. You're referring, of course, to the coelacanth latimeria, which was a fish that we only knew from the fossil records. We believe that it went extinct with the dinosaurs 70 million years ago, and then in 1938, a live one was dredged up off the coast of South Africa. So that's fairly significant in terms of illustrating that things that we think are no longer around, that have gone extinct, they could still be out there somewhere and just beyond our grasp.
Exactly. So there is much on this earth itself that is, not to mention what might be out beyond our own planet that we have not yet discovered. And really, when I look up at the heavens, for example, or even standing at the seashore, I see like the vast, almost infinite magnitude of these things. So I'm a person that says, anything is possible. It would be foolish for me to say that we know everything that a person can know. So that's why it also, the information such as what you have researched and presented in your books and your TV programs is of a great deal of interest to me. So now you seem to have zeroed in on on flying, monsters and humanoids that have the ability to fly. Would that be correct, or are you generally speaking as a cryptozoologist, you research all types of animals and humanoids that have been reported?
Well, there's certainly a qualification that has to be addressed because, as I mentioned earlier, the field of cryptozoology initially started with, or it was started by traditional zoologists, and they wanted to concentrate on things like the yeti, the orang pendek, sea serpents, and things like that, which, although they sound fabulous and remarkable, and certainly have remarkable and fabulous names, they're not scientifically impossible because we do have species in our fossil history that lived, during the Ice Age, for example, during the Miocene epoch, thousands or millions of years ago, that actually matched the modern descriptions of cryptids very well. So that there could be a case like the coelacanth where these animals simply did not go extinct. On the other hand, when we're talking about things like flying humanoids or werewolves or mermaids, these are most certainly things that are very unnatural. There is nothing in our fossil history in the natural world that in any which way resembles these sort of hybrid man-beasts. But the field of cryptozoology has evolved and developed over the past decades to include some of these more remarkable creatures for a number of reasons. One, of course, they have very animalistic qualities, but also, there are suggestions that some of these so-called, man-beast hybrid-type creatures could simply be misidentifications of things that are maybe a little bit more mundane. So, there are a lot of tie-ins, and it's a very elaborate and complex situation problem. So, but that being said, flying humanoids, things like the Mothman, and the description is fairly accurate. Basically human-like figures with wings flying through the air, almost mythological in nature. It's a little bit outside of the field of cryptozoology, but certainly piqued my interest, and it was a fascinating topic to research and write about.
You mentioned a word in here which some of the audience may not be familiar with, which is cryptids. How do you define that?
A cryptid is basically a animal or creature that is researched within the field of cryptozoology. So anything that a cryptozoologist studies or looks for evidence of is a cryptid. And, cryptid, of course, crypt, a derivative from the Greek word meaning hidden. So basically you're talking about a hidden creature, a hidden animal, a hidden life form. Now, I guess that would be the technical description of a cryptid. And we just use that as a general term that covers all of these different things that we investigate. Okay,
good enough. That's good. That's a good definition. So this field, by its very definition, has to be vast, because even when you look at mythology, for example, the number of beasts or hybrids or different type of species that are no longer found in our natural world is near infinite. So a person, and a lot of these have actually been witnessed and seen and reported by people all throughout history and even in modern times. So as a cryptozoologist, you have a vast field of study. And now, as far as these flying humanoids, which is your latest book, is concerned, tell us about, before we get to the Mothman, which I think is the most famous of these, give us a couple other examples of some of these type of flying humanoids.
There's one in England that's quite well known. I guess only well known if you're into this kind of stuff, known as the Owlman. Owlman is sort of the British counterpart to Mothman. The descriptions are fairly different, whereas Mothman is described as being rather tall, about 6 to 7 feet tall, seemingly headless with bat-like wings, sturdy man-like legs, and giant red glowing eyes. That's the general description of the Mothman. Owlman is a little bit smaller. Witnesses have estimated it only stands about 5 feet tall. It seems to be more bird-like. It has kind of feathered gray wings and a body, a black, sneering, scowling face, or mouth rather, no beak, and sort of black pincher-like talons. The eyes are described as being similar to Mothman's, big glowing red eyes, and that's kind of a common thing that is associated with many cryptids. Owlman has been reported primarily in an area of Cornwall in southern England around an old church known as Mownan Church. And this old church is of sort of on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, and it's surrounded by kind of a wooded area and a cemetery, and that's where most of the sightings of Owlman have occurred, and most of them not very recent, going back to the 1970s and in the 80s. In addition to that, people always like to ask me about the bat squatch. Bat squatch, of course, a very colorful name, kind of a spin-off of the Sasquatch, which of course is the giant hairy man-beast of the Pacific Northwest. Bat squatch has been reported in a similar area just outside of Bellingham, Washington. I'm sorry, not Bellingham, Buckley, Washington, which is near Mount Rainier. And the one sighting of the bat squatch described a hulking, hairy, man-like creature, but with wings. And this thing apparently had a wolf-like head and blue-tinted fur, yellow crescent-shaped eyes, and sharp teeth, kind of a remarkable description. Wisconsin has a creature known as the man-bat of Briggs Road. Briggs Road, of course, is a street in Wisconsin that is kind of outside of La Crosse, Wisconsin, Holman, Wisconsin, to be specific. So there are many, many flying humanoids that have been reported in modern times in various places around the world, and there's also a wealth of information that can be found in mythology and folklore around the world, and I do address some of that in the book. There are these Mothman, these Owlman-type creatures that have been described in multiple cultures all over the world, dating back hundreds and thousands of years.
Like the griffin?
The griffin, yes. And in fact, my book, I have a chapter of what I refer to as gargoyles, which of course covers the griffin and other chimera, sort of not really humanoid-type creatures, but I guess monkey-like, dog-like creatures with wings that have been reported. And, this includes the Jersey Devil, which is very well known, from the Northeast here in the United States. A very famous urban legend here in the U.S. speaks of the Jersey Devil, which is described as a kind of a kangaroo-type creature, bipedal creature, or two-legged, with bat-like wings, a long muzzle, and a long forked tail. And it's reputed to live in the Pine Barrens region of New Jersey, which is in the southern part of New Jersey, in a very remote area there.
So this actually, I think I saw an X-Files episode with the Jersey Devil, and also the Chupacabra, and that was a great show where they introduced mythology and sci-fi, and I suppose even in your research, mythology and science, they go hand in hand.
Yeah, mythology is a major component of cryptozoology, and it's worth noting that if you look at a number of the animal discoveries, remarkable animal discoveries that have been made in the past century, many of those started out as mythological creatures. They were viewed by Western science as simply myths, and this would include the giant squid, the Komodo dragon, the mountain gorilla, the okapi, the giant panda. I mean, the list goes on and on. These were viewed as myths and legends until science was actually able to obtain a physical specimen, and then they kind of crossed that barrier from the shadow world into reality and into the science books.
So do you, this might be a little bit off topic, but do you think then mythology could be a retelling of actual history in fictionalized form?
Well, I'm one of those people, and everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I'm one of those people who thinks that there, behind every legend, there's probably a shred of truth. And in some cases that truth may, of course, be embellished to the point where it becomes totally unbelievable. But we come from a tradition of oral history, long before there were books and internets and things like that. There was an oral tradition where people would sit around campfires and tell stories. And you can imagine that the stories that were worth telling the most were probably those that had a certain kind of significance to early people, and that's probably because they involved really remarkable, truly remarkable events that were worth documenting and worth passing on to future generations.
Yeah, I too am of the opinion, let's say, or it is my belief that mythology is, even if it's distorted, but it is a retelling of ancient history and what you might call prehistory before modern man. I'm originally from India, and if you travel through, I don't know if you have traveled through India or not, but especially in southern India, if you travel and you go to some of these temples there, some of the images they have of such creatures as you have researched, it is totally incomprehensible that somebody just drew them out of their own. It was something that they just conjured up in their own mind. So I believe there has to be some sort of basis of collective memory, whatever you might want to call, of something that once existed, and that's why these people are able to tap into that and record it in very vivid color in some cases. If you haven't traveled there, I would highly recommend it. You would find it fascinating.
Oh, it's definitely at the top of my bucket list, Paul. I would love to go to India. And you make a great point there. And, it's worth noting that, many of these mythologies, as you mentioned, they're seemingly colorful, but there seems to be a pattern of symmetry in terms of, looking at different cultures from all over the world that have been separated geographically by great distances, and yet they had virtually identical mythologies, that refer to other types of creatures or spiritual phenomenon or whatever. So, that's, I think, fairly significant, and I think that's very compelling that, that these different cultures around the world had such similar beliefs.
And even in the Bible, there's, it talks about creatures inside the earth, inside the waters, in the heavens, on the surface. So, this information is common across the world, like you said. And if in the book of Revelation, for example, when you read in, I think in chapter 9 about these locusts, which are very apparently some sort of hybrid flying humanoid type creature, they're coming out of the earth. So this information is just about everywhere. So let me ask you one. This in regards to a picture I saw in your book. It's in an introduction that was written to your book by Dr. Carl Schuker, I believe that's how it's called, and he has a picture with this Batman-like like creature. Can you tell me? It really piqued my interest. Can you tell me a little bit about this? What is he holding in his hand? Who is this creature?
Well, Dr. Carl Schuker, who was gracious enough to write the foreword to my book, is widely regarded as, probably the leading cryptozoologist in the world, and this is for a number of reasons. He has a very impressive scientific background, a PhD in comparative physiology, but in addition to that, he has an expansive knowledge of mythologies, and that I think that's key to his success and his knowledge base. But he is basically holding a little figurine that represents a creature known as the Orang Bati. And from the Isle of Seram, which is in Indonesia, there is a legend of something known as the Orang Bati, which translation means man-bat. And this creature, according to local legend, it lives in the caves up in the high volcano known as Mount Kairatu, and that this thing basically swoops down at night and it abducts small children and pets and things like that. So it's greatly feared by the local Moluccan people that live on the Isle of Seram.
So this figurine actually comes from that part of the world? Or was it a Western person that's sculpted this?
Yeah, well, no, yeah. I believe it was sculpted by. Obviously, it's made of plastic, so I'm assuming that it was probably an action figure that was. No, it's not. It's not necessarily a native.
No, it's not native. Okay,
fetish.
Because
no.
I thought it looked like something out of a comic or a comic book or something. You were seeing
exactly.
Right. Okay, very interesting.
Exactly.
So
but as the field of cryptozoology grows, and pardon me, Paul, you have things like action figures of the Jersey Devil and some of these other cryptids that become quite popular.
Absolutely. There was a very interesting story in the beginning of your book about this great moon hoax, which it's very interesting when you go back and read old newspapers and old magazines. The sort of information that is in there. And I had once when I was doing some reading on Bigfoot and Yeti, somebody had mentioned in there that a lot of in the old colonial days in India, a lot of the British, one thing they were famous for was writing reports. And he went and researched some of these reports, and they were actually stories of them having shot and killed a Yeti, So this information that was recorded in days gone by, if somebody had the time to actually research it, there would be so much that's related to these type of things, like the sea serpents, which were spotted all over, that it would be truly, you could write volumes. So what was this great moon hoax story?
Well, the great moon hoax occurred in the mid-18th century. And, as you suggested, back in I like to point this out to people because, obviously back in the day in the 18th and up until the early 19th century, I think newspapers, of course, this was long before we had radio, television, and internet, so people were looking for information and good stories. And so newspapers provided this. They would often report stories that no one could really follow up or corroborate. They were just simply in print and published, and I guess you just took them for their word. But they were also in business. They wanted to sell newspapers back in the day, so it was a business, and so they would often have writers spin these fabulous yarns, and they would create stories that would basically sell products. So there was a newspaper back in the mid-1800s, the New York Sun, that ran a series of articles about a famous astronomer that was supposedly had invented this miraculous telescope that was so powerful that he was able to look at the moon and actually make out man-made or intelligently made structures, and ultimately he was able to see these creatures that were living on the moon, and he described them as being kind of primate, ape-like creatures with wings, though they were seemingly intelligent because they were building these giant temples and basking around, in the sun, sitting out by the water and behaving very much like we do. So the newspaper ran this series of articles for several weeks, and ultimately it was exposed as a hoax. But it certainly served to capture the public's imagination with regard to space exploration and what else might be out there.
Even in the 20th century, you had that famous, we've had that Orson Welles and War of the Worlds hoax.
Yeah. That's a good point. That was still up until that was in the 1930s, right? So
yes.
They were still at that point. And maybe to some extent still, because we were talking about some of the television shows, and I don't want to name any names. I don't want to come across here like I'm trying to defame anybody. But in recent years, there have been some television documentaries, kind of mockumentaries, I guess they could be called, that have been put out there that are just focused on cryptozoological topics, but they're highly fictional and fabricated and very sensational. But they sort of try to present it as real science, as real cryptozoology. And unfortunately, this is really muddying the waters, because I have a number of people that have gotten in touch with me asking me, what my opinion is. And it's fairly evident that these shows are completely scripted and fabricated, and the so-called experts that are being featured are actors, and the subject matter is, simply fabricated. So it does go on still.
It's an infomercial.
Yeah, well, it's a way to make money, and I think as long as there's a need for money, people are always going to try to figure out ways to make it and make more of it. And they're doing it for entertainment purposes, of course. But I think the mistake they're making is that there's no disclaimer, so they are just putting it out there as if it's a true documentary.
See, truth being stranger than fiction, the sad part is that some of these reports, they may actually be proven to be true, although there is no evidence to prove them to be true at this time. But sometime in the future, it may actually be found that a lot of these, stories may actually have some basis in fact. So these Batman, this type of winged humanoid that from I'm only about a third of the way through your Flying Humanoids book at the moment, but it seems like a lot of these winged creatures, they seem to have their flying abilities come from bat-like wings as opposed to feathers like an eagle would have. Is that correct, or am I just have just read the part about the Batmans more than the other ones?
No, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, there are accounts of more traditional what I call birdmen, which have the feathered wings. But you're right; it seems like the leathery, sort of bat-like wings seem to be more prevalent. So I'm really not sure what to make of that, unless if that's really a lot of this probably goes back to the perception of the person that's seeing it. And certainly people that encounter these creatures, their adrenaline's pumping, they're quite terrified, and their sightings and observations are very brief. So, perhaps they are, remembering things the way they want to remember them as opposed to the way they actually are. But, there could be there's most definitely some type of sociological or psychological component to that as well. Because, the images of dragons, that we've had for centuries in different cultures around the world, typically portraying dragons as having these kind of bat-like wings. In prehistoric times, we had flying reptiles known as pterosaurs, which had these long membranous wings that were stretched across their vestigial hands. And then, we also have bats, and bats are very scary creatures to most people. They're fairly harmless to humans for the most part, but they seem to be very terrifying, I guess, because they're mostly nocturnal. They're coming out at night. They live in very dark and scary places like caves and old barns and things like that. So most certainly could be a case of people sort of projecting their own imagery into these creatures.
You're right, they are scary. I've seen these in India, for example, in certain areas they have these vampire bats and these foxhead bats, and they hang from these eucalyptus trees and other high trees, and in the daytime you can see like thousands of them, and it is a very, very especially for a child or something, it could be a very traumatic experience just looking at them, and they're not even doing anything. So I can imagine a creature, if you multiply the size of that by 5 or 10 times, and you see that flying in the air above you, it will really be a very, very terrifying experience. So this Batman, there was these reports of this original Batman that you talk about that was seen in New York City in the late 19th century, and it was seen by a number of people. So I suppose that there has to be people did see something. And so can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Well, that's a fairly well-known story, primarily because it was first written about by John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies book and kind of introduced the flying humanoids to the general public beginning in the late 60s. But there were some newspaper articles that came out, and I believe the year was 1890, if I'm not mistaken, right around 1890, where there was a report that this creature, I'll say being, because he appeared to have a human-like body, was seen flying over Coney Island, New York, over scores of astonished eyewitnesses. And even though he was very high up in the air, people did describe it as having a human-like body with, again, your bat-like wings, Paul, and kind of it was swimming through the air, is the way they described it, kind of a frog-like motion. And what's really interesting is that many people described its face, and they were apparently able to make out an expression on its face, and it was, quote, cruel and determined expression, so whatever that means. And there was one other incident where a year prior where another gentleman had claimed to have seen this thing flying over Brooklyn, New York. So you can imagine the scene at Coney Island, New York, where there are throngs of people out enjoying the boardwalk, and then suddenly this strange creature is flying through the air above their heads. But again, this is we have to be a little bit skeptical about some of these reports from the 19th century, because at that time they were looking for sensational stories and perhaps took some liberties in terms of how they were presenting the material.
But at the same time, Ken, to be fair, the 19th century isn't exactly like the Middle Ages. It was quite similar, at least people's thinking processes, I think, to what we had in the 20th century. Like they had a lot of these technologies, such as radio and such, had already been invented, even the automobile at the end of the 19th century. So beginning of the 20th. So, yes, a lot of these guys were very educated. They weren't exactly, farmers or peasants out in the field somewhere. So, I wouldn't just dismiss all of these reports. There has to be, some of them have to be, I would think, there has to be some validity to them.
Well, that's a fair point, Paul, and I appreciate your objectivity, because that's something I always try to achieve when possible. You're right. You certainly can't dismiss it out of hand. I just like to sort of be a little bit cautious in terms of approaching some of these older stories, because they are just that, stories, and there's really no way to track down or verify the root of the information. But who knows? It is possible, most certainly.
Now, you mentioned the one name, I suppose, that is more famous in this area than any other. That would be, perhaps other than your own, that would be that of John Keel.
Yes.
So John Keel is the one that introduced the world to the Mothman phenomena. I've seen the movie, I've not read the book, but let's talk a little bit about John Keel and the Mothman.
Yes, John Keel, very influential. I remember my mother, who was very adventurous and really encouraged my interest in these topics, telling me about the Mothman when I was very young, and I wasn't long before I had my nose firmly planted in John Keel's books. He did write the Mothman Prophecies, in addition to another book called Strange Creatures from Time and Space. Now, Keel was a colorful character. He was a writer, a journalist. He had a keen interest in all types of Fortean and unexplained phenomenon. For example, he was very much into UFOs and UFO sightings. That was kind of a focus of his research in the late 1960s. However, he also referred to himself as a demonologist, so he definitely had an interest in, demonic and ghostly phenomenon as well. And in 1966, he had heard about these Mothman sightings that were going on in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and he actually traveled out there and spent about a year living in the area around Point Pleasant, interviewing many of the principals and eyewitnesses, getting to know them and their families. He joined forces with a local reporter named Mary Heyer, who was very much tied into or connected to the local happenings as well. And Keel claimed that he never claimed to have had a Mothman sighting. He interviewed over 100 witnesses, apparently, but he had some sightings of UFOs or strange lights in the sky around that time. He believed that he was being stalked and intimidated by men in black, the infamous men in black that appear mysteriously when people have had these types of experiences. And Keel was he was definitely a journalist, so he was out there trying to get to the bottom of things. But I also feel that he had kind of a sensational view of life and the events around him, and so I think that maybe he had. I want to put this as kindly as possible. I guess I'm of the opinion that maybe he was perhaps taking a little bit of journalistic license with some of the things he was reporting, and this fact was borne out through some of my research, that perhaps the way that he presented some of the material was slightly embellished. But I have no way of. I never had the honor of meeting Mr. Keel, so I have no way of kind of backing up that opinion. But his book is very important because it does chronicle the events very closely, and as accurately as you could, I guess, at that point. So yeah, and I should point out that the Mothman Prophecies movie with Richard Gere it is an excellent movie, and I think it catches the general mood and timbre of that time period and the things that were going on. But the book is excellent. I mean, anyone that's interested in unexplained phenomenon of any kind, I would highly encourage you to pick up a copy of the Mothman Prophecies, because there's so much information in there that you don't find in the movie, and it's a very complex, multifaceted, multi-layered case with a lot of different elements that are quite fascinating.
Okay, so let's. So what is this Mothman that he wrote about? Because that's a very famous story. So what can you enlighten the listeners a little bit about that?
Well, the Mothman is probably one of the notorious and infamous figures in the annals of the unexplained. He's the general description, as I mentioned earlier, is a man-like figure standing between 6 to 7 feet tall, very dark color, black or gray, sturdy man-like legs, giant wings with a 10-foot wingspan, and seemingly headless. But the most remarkable feature of the Mothman that all the eyewitnesses described were these giant red glowing eyes like automobile reflectors. And allegedly these eyes had almost a hypnotic or a trance-like effect on eyewitnesses. Mothman behaved very strangely. It was often seen chasing automobiles, chasing and terrifying people. It first burst onto the scene in November of 1966. Two young couples who were out driving in a remote Lover's Lane area known as the TNT area, which had kind of a creepy history, claimed that they saw this Mothman figure and that it chased their car at speeds approaching 100 miles an hour. This, of course, made the newspapers, and Mothman, the name Mothman, it should be pointed out, is a was given by a reporter. So, I mean, as with many cryptids, the names are often very sensational. Mothman did not actually look like a moth or have moth-like characteristics. But there were many sightings of the Mothman for about a year in the area around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is a sleepy rural town on the banks of the Ohio River. And around that same time period, there were other strange things going on as well: livestock mutilations, UFO reports, visits from Men in Black, as I mentioned. And the events culminated in December of 1967, December 15, 1967, when there was a very tragic bridge collapse. The Silver Bridge, which was a large suspension bridge over the Ohio River there, collapsed during rush hour traffic, and 46 people drowned in the icy rivers of the Ohio River. A very tragic story. And shortly thereafter, reports of the Mothman seemed to diminish dramatically. So to this day, the residents of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, feel that there is a link or a connection between sightings of the Mothman and this tragic bridge collapse, as if the Mothman was some type of omen or harbinger that this tragic event was going to occur.
Could the Mothman, this is just, again, I'm asking you to speculate, could you say then that Mothman or these creatures could actually have been the cause of the bridge collapse? Does John Keel have any kind of conclusion as to their role in this?
Well, it's primarily speculation overall, but John infers that the Mothman was basically a warning. But there are those that kind of spin that in the direction that you're suggesting, which is that Mothman actually did cause this bridge to collapse. Now, it's interesting to note that in some of the mythologies of flying humanoid creatures from around the world, other flying humanoids are also viewed as omens, or bad omens. For example, Pazuzu, which is an Assyrian demon, winged demon, was associated with famine and death and catastrophe. And then in Europe you have the Irish banshee, a creature from Scotland that's very similar, known as the scree. And these creatures are also said to appear right before a tragic incident, or sometimes they are a forebearer or warning of death, impending death and doom. So it's really hard to say, if there's no one actually saw the Mothman cause the bridge collapse, although there are some ambiguous reports that Mothman did appear right before that happened. But I think, it's really hard to find the truth behind that.
Yes, of course. That just leads us into the area of the spiritual nature of these things, and if they are evil as they have been perceived to in many cultures, and even like in that movie, especially Mothman, and it was quite obvious that they were not exactly nice folks. No. If they are appearing from somewhere, maybe another dimension, or however they are arriving here, or they are dwelling amongst us in caves, caverns, who knows where, like they may actually have the means of causing this mayhem, which we know that some of these creatures seem to enjoy. But that's, again, like you said, it's just speculation. Now you brought up something that you said that there were a lot of UFO reports, and so there is a very distinct link between these sightings and UFOs. So these are very related fields, are they not?
Yeah, they are, and that's something else that I found through the course of my research on flying humanoids, is that many people have reported them in conjunction with UFO sightings, strange lights in the sky. Many of them have been sighted in areas where there have been high concentrations of UFO activity. And in fact, there's a chapter in my book dedicated specifically to cases where flying humanoids have been seen around or directly after UFOs have landed and so forth. So I think that's, and I guess John Keel, again, should receive credit for being the first one to make note of that. But even back in Point Pleasant, when the Mothman first appeared, strange lights in the sky were very prevalent around that same time period. So, yes, and again, Paul, it's fun to speculate about this stuff. It's really all we can do, because the subject matter is so completely beyond the pale that that's really all we can do at this point. But there does seem to be some type of connection there, and and then again, there's also a chapter in the book towards the end of the book of some of the Mexican cases. And in this particular situation, we're dealing with something else entirely. These are referred to as unidentified flying humanoids, or UFHs, by the local UFO researchers in Mexico that have actually videotaped these beings. But unlike the Mothman and some of these other winged weirdos that we've talked about today, these UFHs, or unidentified flying humanoids, are merely man-like figures without wings, lacking of wings, that are seen floating up high in the air. And they're typically observed and videotaped very high up, and so nobody is able to really discern or establish what in fact they truly are. But Mexico is a nation very rich in UFO activity, and much of that has occurred over the past decades.
Okay, yes, you're right. Mexico is both for UFO activity and, Mexico is a very interesting, actually Central America as a whole, and I suppose even South America, which you have visited, and it's more of this sort of history left behind there than anywhere else in the world, I would think. So yes, you're absolutely right. Now this, what do you think are these things like flesh and blood?
I wasn't able to come to too many conclusions, Paul. As you might expect. I mean, I tried to present all the material to the readers so that they could form their own objective opinions. And I do have a concluding chapter where I sort of cover the primary theories that are out there. But I'm firmly of the opinion that these are not flesh and blood creatures, at least not in the way that we understand. They do appear to have a physical presence. That is, they manifest, and they seem to be very real and very tangible to the people that have encountered them. But on the other hand, they do not represent anything in the fossil history or in the natural world, even remotely. So in that respect, and also their behavior, if you look at their behavior, which seems to be centered around terrifying people, chasing people, and then vanishing. I do not think they are flesh and blood. I guess people can draw their own conclusions, and many people have referred to them as being interdimensional or extraterrestrial, demonic, supernatural. Everyone's got a different sort of word that they would use to describe that. Demonic, I think I already said that. Angelic, but not wholly physical. They're not here all the time. They appear suddenly at a time and place of their choosing, and then they vanish mysteriously, and no one knows where they go.
Could they be some sort of holographic projections?
Yes, and that's one of the theories that has been brought up. They could be basically what are referred to as thought projections. That's something that I cover in the concluding chapter. That perhaps there is a psychological component that we are somehow projecting these beings onto the fabric of our reality, and that their origin is rooted deep within our unconscious minds. And it's pretty cosmic stuff, but I think most people would agree that the human mind is vastly more powerful than we could ever imagine, and that perhaps in some ways that we are capable of sort of opening doorways or manifesting, creating a climate for things to manifest into our reality. So, there are many researchers that believe that applies not only to the Mothman, but perhaps to some of the other cryptids out there, like things like Bigfoot even. Many skeptics have always asked me, well, if Bigfoot exists, we should have a body by now. We should have a good, clear photograph. Why don't we? And some of the researchers in the field of cryptozoology have started to suggest that perhaps that Bigfoot and creatures like Bigfoot are thought projections, that they are not wholly physical beings.
Perhaps they do have some videos and photographs that are locked away in the Smithsonian or something.
That's also a possibility. Who knows? Like
that video I saw of Bigfoot, the famous video. It's there's still a lot of debate. A lot of people still consider that to be real. I mean, it's although some say it's a hoax, but it's hard to prove or disprove one way or the other.
Yes, exactly. Very controversial. The Patterson film, of course, is what you're referring to. The iconic image of Bigfoot that most people have. It was a film shot in October of 1967 by two Bigfoot researchers in Northern California, and it's never been proven or disproven, and I don't think it ever can be either way. So I personally think it's authentic footage, and I base that primarily on the fact that when the subject in the film is compared to costumes ape-like costumes that existed during the 1960s. I really don't think the technology existed at that time to create such a convincing ape man. And in fact, it may still not exist.
Yeah, when you think about, sorry to interrupt you, when you think about movies like Planet of the Apes, okay, and you compare that to that video, yeah, even like in that movie, the costumes are very apparent. And the makeup and all that, it was apparent that it was a person that was dressed up like that. But in that video, yes, it was better. Like if it was a costume, it was a better costume than even in those movies, which were made later.
Exactly.
Which were made later in the 70s.
Yeah, you can actually, if you study that film and watched it as many times as I have, and you know, it's been studied also by physical anthropologists who are experts in primate anatomy. You can actually see muscles flexing, and the hair, the body, the mass, everything looks very, very natural. It does not at all look like a costume. And as you pointed out, I mean, Planet of the Apes, which was made around that same time period, you know, very obviously, you know, costumes and makeup and so forth. So,
well, it's very interesting because that would tend to provide at least some substantiation that some of these at least can be flesh and blood, and maybe it is just a matter of time before we actually capture one or find one, or if they have already been, who knows, something like the X-Files might happen where the military just shows up and carts them away and nothing is ever heard of that again, and those possibilities always exist. So Ken, before we finish off here, can you, these phenomenon with these flying humanoids and these other type of strange and even mythological creatures, is that more so in the Western Hemisphere, or do these reports come from all around the world?
Well, they're from all around the world, and of course Mothman is the most famous of these, and that's here in North America. There do seem to be some sort of hot spots around North America and in Europe, but there are legends and mythologies from all over the world. I mentioned the Orangbati of Saram earlier. Japan has something known as the Tengu. Paul, since you are from India, you're probably familiar with Garuda.
Of course, yes.
South America, really only one report from Australia and New Zealand that I was able to find. But yeah, it's a global phenomenon, and the descriptions are somewhat similar, but also vary to some extent. So it's hard to really draw a bead onto exactly what these things are, but they appear to be everywhere.
Nothing new under the sun. You know, these stories are like when we were talking about Planet of the Apes. In India, of course, they have Hanuman, which is one of their major gods, who is a monkey humanoid. Okay, so that story in the Mahabharata and the other writings is quite well developed. So, you know, it seems like to me that such creatures at one point in time, because those stories, they have been recorded, written down. They speak about a land bridge between India and Sri Lanka and things like that. So there are so many historical elements in it. So I wonder, you know, whether that was the original Planet of the Apes many, many thousands of years ago. And I suppose that's where a lot of your cryptozoology may actually lead you back to. Well, in conclusion, Ken, you know, thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time to speak to me and my audience. And can you please tell listeners, you know, about your books and other products that you might have, and your website, and where they can contact you?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Paul, and I'd just like to say that you were a very gracious and informed host. You had some really wonderful questions, and it was definitely a fascinating discussion. Yes, I can be reached if anyone wants to reach me directly, if they have a question, comment, inquiry, a sighting to report. I have a website, which is kengerhard.com, KenGerhard.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Ken Gerhard Cryptozoologist. And I would encourage your listeners, if they're interested in the subject, to go out and look for copies of my books. They can be found online. My new book is called Encounters with Flying Humanoids, Mothman, Man-Birds, Gargoyles, and Other Winged Beasts. It is available from online book retailers such as Amazon. You can also find it at all Barnes & Noble's locations. I also have two other books. One is called Monsters of Texas, co-authored with Nick Redfern. That's available on Amazon as well. And my first book, Big Bird, Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters. So pretty cool stuff, and always enjoy talking about it.
Do you have any TV programs, etc., that are in the works that will be aired in the near future?
Yes, thank you for asking. I just did an episode for a show called The Unexplained Files. It is in Season 2. It's on the Science Channel, which is an offshoot of Discovery Channel. And I will be doing an upcoming episode about the Mexican chupacabra. In addition to that, later this year, I will be appearing in a new series on Destination America Network, and that's called Supernatural Files. And in that particular episode, we are going to be talking about more chupacabras and also the legendary Kraken.
Okay, that sounds. I would love to hear about that Kraken in particular. But Ken, thank you again. And you have joined us today. I believe you're down in Texas, and we would like to talk to you about monsters of Texas perhaps next time we do another program. And I'm also very keen actually to talk to Nick Redfern as well, because he's also a very interesting chap like yourself. So thank you.
Absolutely, Paul.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone that listened in. Let's do it again real soon.
Okay, great. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon.
Burning out the power of sin. Sunfire filling me with God's love eternally. Touch me and I'm not the same. Freeing me from my guilt and shame. Only He can take control of my soul, making me whole. Feel His power, I feel His might. The Son of God, the Son of Light. He's given me a second sight of my own, and now I'm no longer alone. For the rest of my life, with His words to guide me, I'll go where He leads, for His love's inside me. From now on, yeah, with Sunfire. Fire can set you free. It's meant for you, it's meant for me. Our witness is for all to see, sharing